So, Dr. Loke, there is a whole debate going on within the Christian and science community about the historical Adam. Was there an actual, literal, historical figure named Adam? What would that mean? How does that relate to DNA and biology and all of these types of questions? Could you maybe give us a quick outline of the different views that are out there right now and who the major figures who hold them?
Okay, so some people deny that there's a historical Adam, right? But many Christians would affirm that there is a historical Adam. And among those who affirm that there is a historical Adam, some thinks that Adam might not be the first human being, right? So, for example, Josh Somidas, he defends a variety of views in his book, but one of the views that he argued that he thinks that there's a possibility that Adam may not be the very first human being, right? So there could be human beings who already existed before Adam, um, but Adam is the first important kind of representative, right, for all of us today. So some some may not think that Adam is necessarily the first human being, but others, such as myself and Dr. William Lane Craig, we would argue that Adam is the first human being. And so the Homo that existed before Adam, no, they are not actual human being, even though they may be anatomical Homo. So on Dr. Craig's view, there are Homo erectus, for example, who existed before Adam, but those are not human beings. And among those who affirm that Adam is the first human being, there's also different views about how long ago did Adam lived. So for Dr. Craig, for example, right, he would say that Adam lived a very long time ago, right? So say for example around 700,000 years ago, right? So he's a Homo heidelbergensis. Whereas other scholars who affirm a historical Adam, they some of them have hold to a more recent Adam view, and among the more recent Adam view, there's also a range of perspectives. So some think that Adam probably lived during the Neolithic era. So based on their interpretation of Genesis 4, for example, they think that Seth and Abel and Seth, Cain, Abel, and Seth, right? So Cain and Abel. So those people are like Neolithic farmers, and so they think that Adam would probably be a Neolithic, live in the Neolithic era, right, as well. So around 10,000 years or within that period. And but there are other scholars, such as Hugh Ross, who think that Adam would have lived earlier than that, right? So around 50,000 years ago. So these are the range of views. And for myself, my view is that well, I think that Dr. Craig's view is a possibility. I'm not excluding that. However, I also think that Adam could have lived more recently as well. So I'm open to all these different possibilities, and I don't think that the biblical or the scientific data actually exclude these various possibilities. Now, however, I do disagree with the view which Somidas defended, that Adam is not the first human being, right? So I don't agree with that. I think Dr. Craig is right to say that Adam is the first human being. However, Adam, he could have lived, who knows, right? It could be as old as Dr. Craig says, or it could be more recent. Now, Dr. Craig disagrees with my view. He thinks that Adam would have lived much earlier than that, and the reason why Dr. Craig thinks so is because he thinks that there's evidence that human beings around the those Homo around around the time of, say, the Homo heidelbergensis, right? They already illustrated capacities for abstract thinking, symbolic behavior, and Dr. Craig thinks that those conditions will be sufficient to indicate that they are human beings. However, I think the main problem with Dr. Craig's analysis is that he neglected the importance of considering religiosity and spirituality when we think about human nature. And these points about spirituality and religiosity are important because when we read the biblical text, the Bible tells us that human beings are created in the image of God. And what that means is that humans are aware of their responsibility towards God the creator, right? So God created Adam and commissioned him to subdue the world, right? So humans are supposed to play that functional role of representing God, right? To take care of the world. And so we would, so given that this is what the Bible says, we would need to look for evidence, right? So is there any evidence that Homo heidelbergensis, right, that they have this capacity to be aware of a creator, that some of them actually practice worship of gods or something like that, right? And there is not yet such evidence, right? So archaeologists, scientists have not discovered such evidence yet. But Dr. Craig, he just simply assumed that creatures who are able to have abstract thinking, etc., they would also be God's image bearers and also have the capacity to know about God. But this assumption is not proven, right? You cannot just simply assume that those creatures who are able to have those abstract thinking, etc., would also be able to think about God. Now, this is an unproven assumption. And moreover, when we look at the scientific record, we find that there is clear evidence of religiosity, for example, say around 50,000 years ago. But there is no such clear evidence before that, right? So, so this shows that religiosity and the evidence for religiosity and the evidence for abstract thinking, they do not go together, right? So there is evidence of abstract thinking, etc., much longer, much longer before, as Dr. Craig argued. But then the evidence for religiosity only comes much later, right? So this shows, so we cannot simply assume that those creatures who are able to have abstract thinking would also be able to do worship God, right? So that is an unproven assumption. And it seems to be contradicted by the scientific evidence at present, right? Um, so I don't think Dr. Craig's objections to my view hold. And I think that he has failed to consider some important points about religiosity and spirituality. And I also want to emphasize that the spirituality that I'm talking about, right, is the capacity to be aware of a creator God. So it's not just simply burying the dead or things like that, right? Which we know that the Neanderthals, for example, right, there's evidence that they bury the dead. But that is that also doesn't necessarily entail an awareness of a creator God, right? Which is what the biblical text actually talks about. And so when did people start to become aware of a creator God? Well, the current evidence we have suggests that, right, is probably a few thousand years ago. However, the evidence that we have right now is not complete, right? So there's still a lot of things that we don't know about people who lived long time ago. So it may well be the case that the people are aware of God and worship a creator God way before that, right? Way before a few thousand years ago. And that's why I say, and that's the reason why I think we should be open to various possibilities, right? And that's also the reason why I'm open to both a Neolithic Adam view and also a Hugh Ross view, which suggests that for all we know, it could be that Adam lived 50,000 years ago. I don't rule out these possibilities, right? Because the record of evidence we have is incomplete, right? So who knows? Right? You may discover such evidence of people worshiping God, 50,000 years ago. I mean, that is also possible. So I'm open to various possibilities, and I think that is how we should approach this topic. Because what I find problematic in many discussions is that people tend to exclude certain possibilities based on incomplete evidence and based on unjustified assumptions, right? Like what Dr. Craig holds. And so I think the more a better view and more careful view, is to be open to possibilities, and so that's the reason why I hold the view I hold.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast. If you like what you heard, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review. We're an up-and-coming podcast, and every little bit helps. Also consider joining our Patreon page. Patreon sponsors have exclusive access to unaired episodes, different kinds of merchandise, the ability to suggest an episode, and even an hour-long interview with Jonathan and I. Check it out at spirituallyincorrectpodcast.com and see what you're missing out on. Sound effects from zapsplat.com. Special thanks to Jordan Birch, whose song Starry Night provides the intro and outro for this podcast. You can hear more of his music on YouTube or Spotify.